Hey Flappers, welcome back. Today I'll be Professor Flappy to teach you some new GMing tools for crits. So take out those notebooks, nerds. In any TTRPG, crits are always a weird subject. Some people, as we've seen from reactions from one D&D, hate crits outside of combat. I tend to disagree with this for a number of reasons, and a good amount of people agree with me, so I'll fight for it. I've studied the pros and put together this guide to really hit home honoring crits. I want to introduce a new idea to you. It's called planned crits. There are some good and bad outcomes that are destined to come up in one way or another. You make a list ahead of time and then you pull out those ideas at a moment's notice. Basic ideas for a big moment. You're sort of just like taking this story moment that you could just dump on your players, but instead you're deciding to use it at a moment that is also big for the players. I want to make sure that you get the idea in your head that you can plan your crits ahead of time and you don't have to always be on the fly. A wizard could drop the scry spell on the players at any point. It doesn't feel as right as if a player got a crit fail on an investigation roll and suddenly the dark wizard sees what they're up to. It kind of makes that scry spell feel a little bit more powerful and that crit feel a little bit more valuable. It reminds players that you can't just roll and have things sort of work out in your favor. The whole idea behind this entire video is that on the fly crits and planned crits, all of it can be improved following just very simple guidelines, and these are things that you'll have to be on top of in the moment. When you are planning these crits, you're gonna look at these options: character-based ideas based around each individual, location-based ideas which are based on specific areas. Sometimes it could be a whole city, sometimes it could just be if they crit in a building. This is an idea that I have. For a story-based idea, they are based on time and the time to find information out or use this crit basically runs out, and that's by design. And then for good crits, you have immediate safety, and bad crits, you have immediate danger. In Dimension 20, they would call this a box of doom roll. The principles of each should feel good, should feel bad. You don't want a crit success or a good crit to feel bad. Earlier when I wrote this example, it's about a medicine check, and I had the idea that you think of your heart as you think of home and your heart skips a beat. Is that an omen? Maybe. If something is an omen, that's not a crit that feels good. So make sure you're not making your crits that are good feel bad. When we look at this example, I want to keep in mind this is the same medicine check used in two different scenarios. One is a natural 20 and one is a natural 1. Natural 20, helping your friend from the edge of death, you become acutely aware of your own mortality. The mortality of the beast in front of you. The two of you are connected. Your heart beats in your chest, and its heart, that's it. The weak point, its heart, must not be in its chest. It must be somewhere else. Revealing this information is part of a planned crit. Now, on the other hand, you have a medicine check. You are reminded of moments where you felt helpless to your friends, an arrow in the gut, and there's nothing you can do for them in this moment as you freeze up in fear. Their life is in their own hands now. And basically what you're doing is you're not using any planned crit. The feeling of not being able to help your friend is already punishment enough, and you would get that with a failure. But with a critical failure, you can't just move on from it as a DM either. When you give it some time to sink into the player, into the character, suddenly that failure becomes, oh my god, what effect does this have on me? Make sure you ask. Okay, number 1, assess the situation. Number 2, set the stakes. And number 3, stick to your guns. If a player asks to attempt something, make sure you slow yourself down a little bit and don't immediately ask for a roll. And pro tip, before asking a player to roll a skill, you can actually slow yourself down by just asking what their bonus is. It's a really good way to be like, okay, they're looking for their skill bonus, which they'd have to do anyway. I can settle myself for this roll. I know what's happening. And sometimes you don't need this, you know? Sometimes you don't need to go through the whole shebang. But remember to slow down every once in a while and assess exactly what's going on. Number 2 is to set the stakes. And you sort of have an idea of what the stakes are already. If you're not good at keeping stakes in your head, write it down on a piece of paper so that you can later, number 3, stick to your gun. You owe it to your players to have a honest outcome of a roll. Target number is part of that outcome. The stakes are part of that outcome. Stakes basically being the ideal outcome versus its antithesis. If we're looking at, for example, a deception contest where you roll deception and they roll insight, the stakes aren't I lie versus I get caught lying, but rather I access new information versus I am no longer welcome at this party. Pro tip, if the stakes aren't clear to you as the DM, then they're definitely not clear to the player. It's best to clarify from your player what they want to happen. They will always know what the sort of optimal outcome stakes are. What they don't always know are what the antithesis stakes are. Sometimes you can fill them in, sometimes maybe you shouldn't for a dramatic effect. Never ever hide the risk of death because it's just going to make players upset. There's not an appropriate way to suddenly kill a PC. If you think in the mind of a character, if you think in the mind of this is a person living in the world, they probably have a good idea of some level of a risk of death. I'm not saying like every 5 feet you move forward in a dungeon, you might die here. Like you don't have to let them know that they might die in a constantly dangerous situation. But when the sort of the tide of battle, a sea change happens, when a moment is big enough to warrant possible PC death, you should really let your players know. That leads me to the last point, which is stick to your guns. Don't let players weasel out of consequences that were established beforehand. You owe it to the story to follow through without giving additional outs. Players are not going to want to die. They're not going to want their characters to die. Players already don't want to die, but their characters aren't going to want to die. Before the roll, set the stakes and don't ease up once you see what's happened. And this is tough for a lot of DMs, including myself, because these characters, they're like little babies and you want to take care of them. But if the stakes don't matter, if nothing matters, then the feeling of the world isn't going to be real. You're gonna wanna be sympathetic to these players. The biggest pro tip I can give you is that at some points as a DM, you have to stick to your guns. You have to look down. You have to give your player a serious face and say, you have to make the roll. It's tough. It's really tough as a DM because this is like your friend, you know? And it's hard. It's hard to be like, I'm sorry, but I can't. I know this is sad, but you need to make the roll. Make the roll, you know, it's the ultimate end to any tomfoolery. Speaking of tomfoolery, this is Thomas H. Foolery would like to remind you to like this video. Thomas won't leave me alone until you do, so please make sure you like the video. It really helps spread it to more eyes, help more people, and really helps the channel out a lot. So please just take a second and click on the good thumbs up. Let's talk about some hypothetical crit circumstances. We'll take this sort of tips that I taught you earlier and we'll apply them here to these situations. So, assess the situation. The party's monk would like to perform some cool death-defying acrobatics, walking on the rope railing of a bridge that spans over a deep chasm. First thought, critical failure, standing over a deep chasm, falls, right? He probably falls, but then you don't really consider the stakes. This player wasn't walking on the tightrope of a bridge thinking, I'm probably gonna die. They're probably doing it thinking, I can look cool for the other players here. And as a DM, you gotta be looking at this and be like, this is a monk, okay? He's probably got expertise in acrobatics. There's probably no chance that he hasn't done this before, walked on a tightrope at a high altitude in the cold. This guy, no way, no how is he gonna fall off. But what are the stakes at play here? Looking cool versus looking foolish. You want this guy to look foolish. So my decision is you hop up on the rope, which has a little more slack than you anticipated. You feel your blood pressure rise as the steepness of the possible fall begins to hit you. You're very nimble and catch yourself as you knew you would, but in your haste to save yourself, you lose your composure a little bit. Pick an item from your inventory, or 1 gold coin, to fall out of reach down the chasm. Why does this work? Acrobatics is not hard for this character in any way, so why take that away from them when instead what you're doing is sort of understanding that they're skilled in this subject, but made a sort of logical error as they went about this sort of routine activity. Now, on the other side of the coin, there is the critical success in the same situation. You want this player to look cool rather than foolish, and in the most spectacular way you can as a DM. My solution is your monkish wisdom allows you to seize the moments you can and live life to its fullest. While you display the comedy of a circus performer and the tenacity of a daredevil, make a wisdom check, yielding only good results. Low roll, you just get a boon, basically, some sort of inspiration point or Benny for Savage World. The idea is that you are inspired and you've now satisfied that urge to look cool in front of your friends. On a high roll, you've actually inspired your group, a break from the tension of the mission. Everyone has had a mental break for, if only just a moment, but it feels like an eternity to be able to get that moment. And a short rest feels like it really like symbolizes that break for the party. Now let's take the same sort of situation. It's a tightrope walk, but let's raise the stakes by a ton. So the party's monk is bottlenecking ninjas on a tightrope, basically fighting them to hold them back, make sure they don't get past them. They've begun to leap over the monk, but he held them off for about a turn. They are threatening to reach his friends who have gotten safely to the other side with the mission item, some sort of lost totem or something like that. The monk would like to use his action to jump on the tightrope at great risk to themselves in order to shake as many ninjas off as possible. The ninjas go next in the initiative, and many will reach his low health friends. The result here is a critical failure. And the stakes that we're looking at are taking them in one moment, as many ninjas as possible, rather than using however many attacks a monk might have, I don't know, 5, 6, at the possible cost of one's own life. So let's say the monk could knock a bunch of them out, but there would still be a ton left and their party would still be in danger. But he could take away the danger with this one thing. Let the player know there's a small chance that this might go very badly. You look down at the chasm. You could survive the fall because you're a monk and you have slow fall, but you'd be leaving your friends to die and you wouldn't be able to get back up. Life or death, as a reaction, do you pull out a sharp object to cut the line should you truly fail, or do you save your reaction for slow fall? This is the sort of big question that basically asks, are you ready to be a hero if this goes south? Regardless of what the role is, you ask this before the role because it's such a dire consequence, such a big moment that everyone should treat it for what it is. If you don't end up doing it before the role, just make sure you make this player understand the stakes of what's happening. Now we get to after the role, the cold, the altitude. No amount of training could have prepared you for this moment. It was all or nothing. You jump up and midair, you know this is going poorly. You have the knife in your hand and you slash the cord as you fall to your death. Why this works is because instant death is a really mean thing to force on a PC. Ideally, you prime them and give them the choice to be a hero before the roll, but if not, after is fine. Just as long as the choice to be a hero is there. And you have ultimately given them a choice to live or die here. The character death becomes very meaningful. A fail up at the ultimate cost is what big decisions in D&D or any TTRPG are all about. Now, the flip side of this is the incredible feeling that you would get on a crit success. I wrote crit failure here, so that's a mistake. But the idea is the same scenario. You know that you're going to take the choice to be a hero here, and you would sacrifice your life for your friends, but you didn't have to. Failure didn't come to you, and that's a huge thing. So you have to make sure that the stakes are set beforehand so that the player actually knows this crit is a big, big thing. You narrate it. Every failure in the face of defeat flashes before your eyes. You remember those you failed in the past, what you would give to go back and change things. Not today. You drop down, swing around the rope, building momentum, shoot yourself 30 feet in the air, send out one leg in a fierce kick. As you descend, wham! The rope drops 20 feet and springs you back into the air, and the ninjas all have to hit that same crit or else they fall. Odds are none of them are doing it. Priming. The priming and the choice beforehand is really, really big. You force the player to come to terms with the choice that they're making. You understand what their decision is, and then you have them make the check. And it's such a sweet moment. This is a legendary moment, and that's what makes this really special, is because the payoff is there. And the threat of death was real. They understood that in that moment. Understanding that is huge, and it's a big part of, TTRPG and any sort of roleplay experience. This is the sort of things that someone would be talking about for years. They would be talking about it for years because it's just such a legendary moment. So, take it from Professor Flappy. Understand that crits can be better as long as you take a logical approach to them, understand the stakes, and really, really go over in your head what you're doing before you do it. That's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.